Our police chiefs are warning that Labour's sentencing bill could trigger a 6% rise in crime in the UK, meaning an additional 396,000 crimes each year. If you follow those numbers, this comes as 2 more prisoners were accidentally released in the past week, signalling a justice system on the brink of collapse. One of them actually handed himself in this morning. The sex offender is yet to be found. In a moment, we'll speak to Dr. Phillip, former Justice Minister, who knows a thing or two about this area. First, Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley. Matthew, good afternoon to you. Look, I know Police and Crime Commissioners, along with Chief Constables and others, do their best to find ways of reduction and new initiatives to try and reduce criminality in your own areas and your own patch, etc. The smart money says, well, if you start releasing people earlier than they should do, just one example of this, then you might end up with a bigger problem than the one you started with. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Ian. I mean, you're absolutely right. We've seen reductions in crime in Thames Valley, around 2% every year for the last few years. So things are going in the right direction. But I think the National Police Chiefs Council are quite right to raise the risk of this. Simply, if you've got people who should be locked up and in prison out on our streets, the chances are they're going to be committing offences against the rest of us. And that's one of the reasons why it's important that we do lock people up when it's appropriate, because it's about protection of the public more broadly. Now, of course, it's also right that we do better work around rehabilitation. And I think where the government are missing a trick is that one of the messages around short sentences not working is because there isn't enough done on rehabilitation, there isn't enough done on drug treatment. That may be true, but that doesn't mean that you scrap the short sentences as well. I think there is a happy medium which we seem to miss in this country, which is where we do lock people up because punishment is quite right, keeping people off the streets and protecting the rest of us is quite right, and while they're behind bars, we ought to be rehabilitating them. We ought to be teaching them to read and write and training them so they can get a job when they come out of prison the other end. We ought to be getting them off drugs whilst they're in prison, not as we have at the moment where people will go into prison and they'll come out addicted to more substances than they went in. Yeah. So it's absolutely clear prison isn't working, but not sending people to prison is not an option. I think that this change, this removal of a lot of these short sentences will see prolific offenders, who are often the ones who cause some of the most significant volumes of crime in our communities. They're not the most serious offenders necessarily.
Yeah, that's true.
But they're the ones that the regular shoplifters, the regular criminals who are responsible for vehicle crime, those lower level, I hate to say low level, but those lower level things which will cause real disruption to communities, make people feel unsafe. And simply allowing them to come back out again, we will see that cycle of crime repeated.
Well, 100%. I've told this story often. I remember a prison going on a walk around, it was Maidstone Prison in Kent. The prison governor was saying, that wing over there, we don't get any trouble from those people. That wing over there, we don't really get any trouble. That one over there, we get a lot of trouble. He said, these are the ones that are in and out, like regularly, non-stop. They go out, 2 months away, they're back again, usually sitting there with their mates in the cell next to them. It's just a kind of revolving door of criminality. And yet that might well be the group that end up not going to jail.
I mean, I think we've got another problem at the moment. There's 2 pieces of legislation going through Parliament. There's a sentencing bill, but there's also the crime and policing bill. And one of the things that's much heralded in this is around the £200 threshold for shoplifting.
Yeah.
I've talked on your show about this before, is a complete urban myth that shoplifting below £200 had been decriminalised. It wasn't. What happened was you could go to the magistrates' court rather than the Crown Court for offences below £200. Yeah. That was meant to take pressure off the Crown Court, and I can think of cases, plenty of cases which the police have prosecuted, where people have ended up going to prison for those lower value offences, but it allows swift justice. And we've allowed this myth to grow up in this country, where the current government have told everybody that nothing happens for less than £200. It's simply not true. But what they're changing in the new legislation is they're making theft below £200 what's called an either way offence, which means it can be tried either in the Crown Court or the Magistrates' Court. And I guarantee if I was arrested for stealing a bottle of whiskey, I'd say, I want my day in court, I want a jury trial, and I'll wait 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, please, for a court date. Yeah. That one change is going to mean that rather than seeing swift justice with people taken to a magistrate's court, potentially getting a short prison sentence for that theft offence. Instead, they're going to be left out in the community. They're going to be out there, I think, probably for years waiting for a court date for some of those lower level offences. And at the end of it, are we going to get witnesses who are willing to come forward 3 or 4 years down the line? There's a real challenge around criminals seeking to delay cases through our Crown courts, and that one simple change potentially puts another 100,000 cases through the Crown courts.
Yeah, 100%. Matthew, thank you very much indeed for that. Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner for Thames Valley. Let's speak with Dr. Phillip Lee, former Justice Minister, was a Conservative MP for Bracknell for almost a decade, as I remember. Phillip, now moved over to the Lib Dems.
No, I'm not there now.
Oh, you left the Lib Dems now? Is there no happy home for you, Phillip?
Well, exactly. I get the impression from polling about 5 million of me, I'm not alone, are politically homeless here.
Yeah.
So
no, I think there's a lot of our listeners as well.
I'm waiting. I'm waiting to see until there's a party that comes along that's serious in the centre ground.
Well, you've got Polanski with his Greens, you've got Farage with his Reform.
The polarisation of politics started with the referendum in 2016, and it's ongoing.
Yeah, well, you're absolutely right about that. Something else that's ongoing, of course, is crime. I've always had this vision that in 300 years' time, kids will be taught in school, they'll be musing and scratching their heads. Well, they couldn't sort out crime back in the day. It'll be an extraordinary mystery to future generations, but we clearly haven't. And the balance that no one can quite get right is this business. Does prison work to a degree? For some people, if I went to jail, it would absolutely work. If you went to jail, it probably would. For some people, it clearly doesn't. For others, it compounds the problems. On and on it goes. You know this as a former Justice Minister. It's never off the desk when you're in government, these kind of dilemmas. What is the answer here? Because, release people where prison makes no sense. Yeah. But if they're likely to commit more crime, then you've created a problem, not solved one.
I mean, how long have you got, Ian? I can tell you now that the biggest challenge facing the Ministry of Justice is recidivism, reoffending. Yeah. The entire place is creaking in every way, staffing, both in the department but also within prisons, because the courts are overflowing, the police are having to reduce their interest in certain crimes. The whole thing is to do with reoffending. And when you look at the numbers, the reoffending is being done by a relatively small number of people. Yeah. So it's like a churn, right? Now, to deal with it, and trust me, I've got the scars on my back quite literally from being in the chamber. If you are a Conservative, it's quite difficult to deal with this, because when you look at the numbers, when you look at the state of the criminal justice system, when you look at the way in which the private sector interacts with the criminal justice system, which is also dreadful. I mean, it really is. I mean, I remember I had prisons where the per place prisons, the private prisons were twice as expensive as the state-owned prisons. Wow. So when you look at the whole thing, actually to deal with it properly, sensibly, following evidence, which is the sort of politics I always try to immerse myself in, you end up having to come to some difficult conclusions around sentencing, and also difficult conclusions about how you deal with people who are leaving prison. Because otherwise, if you don't deal with them as they're leaving prison, ideally if you let them out of prison when they're supposed to be let out of prison, they just come back, because it's a rational behaviour. For somebody who's generally, they're quite chaotic characters, they go out and they're being asked to go and see the private probation service. And by the way, the privatisation of the probation service was an absolute disaster. So you've got that. They got one agency, you've got local government doing the housing. You've got all of it, and this one individual who's been locked up for a couple of years comes out. The appointments are here, there, and everywhere. They don't have a car. They don't have any accommodation, whatever. What do they end up doing? They end up repeating their behaviour, nicking stuff in order to survive sometimes. But actually, it's just a rational response to their circumstances. Yeah. That does not mean that they shouldn't be charged, convicted, and banged up where appropriate. It's just that the dealing with these issues isn't just about banging them up. And yes, I can say in one sentence, prison doesn't work. Just look at the numbers, the recidivism numbers. Prison doesn't work, but it only works in that it takes these people off the street and stopping them making crime. So it works in that it stops them committing crime
for that period of incarceration.
But they don't. It doesn't work in terms of stopping them.
You don't adjust the mentality, the criminal mentality.
The hard stuff, which often ends up with. I remember, I'll give you an example. I pushed hard for sport in the criminal justice system because I'd looked at the evidence about particular sports that work to reach particular types of prisoners. One sport in particular is well documented, amateur boxing in communities, just improves discipline, reduces crime, etc., etc. And I wanted to try to use amateur boxing internally within the prison system. What did I get? Within the system itself, within HMPPS, oh, we don't do that. And then the papers got hold of it and started having a go at me, thinking that somehow I was trying to teach them how to fight. Trust me, these guys know how to throw a punch. They're aggressive and they're violent, yeah? The point I'm trying to make is that it's often quite tough to do what the evidence tells you to do in this environment. And the final thing I say, rant over after this, Ian, is justice has always been a Cinderella speciality in politics. You know, you don't go to justice well, ask David Lammy, you don't go to make your mark in politics. It's tough because the system's pretty screwed throughout the entire police, prisons, courts, the whole thing. And there's always some really tough stories. So you get the War Boys release a couple of years ago, but the proposed release. You know, those sorts of things come up as a matter of routine. Now we're getting these prisoners being released by mistake. I mean, it's not easy being a justice minister.
No, I don't suppose it is, and you know, I wouldn't want to be one. I wonder if there's almost another interpretation of all of this. Do we just have to conclude, Philip, that you know the human race, the human gene pool, however you want to look at it, will just always throw up a percentage of wrong-uns, and those wrong-uns might be lifelong wrong-uns. They might be people who, because of their circumstances, had a horrendous start in life and went down the wrong path, but they soon got back on track. We can try all we like, but we're always going to be putting a gloss on it because there is no solution to eradicating criminality.
I mean, I hate to say it, but if you sort of applied that thinking to health, to education, you know, it's not just in the justice arena where there is this, you could make a case for a particular section of the population just not being capable of either looking after themselves, educating themselves, or indeed not committing crime. I try to believe in the more positive side of human spirit, and I think you can change things. I'll give you one example, Ian. I was responsible for youth justice. Now, at any one time, there's about 1,000 people under 18 banged up in this country. The recidivism rate in the justice system, the youth justice system, is around about 70%, or it certainly was when I was doing it. Which is the definition of failure, basically. In Spain, these figures are from when I was a minister. About 70% of the places for youth justice places in Spain are provided by a not-for-profit organisation called Diagrama. I went over to one of these units. Their recidivism rate at the time was less than 40%. It may have even been lower than that. So about half. The costs don't even go there. Some of the private sector youth justice institutions in this country, absolutely shocking costs. These are PFIs actually signed by under the new Labour government. So we're talking Jack Straw time. You know, over £200,000 a year per place.
Wow.
With a 70% recidivism rate. And I wanted to bring Diagrama into this country to take over, actually specifically Medway, because you remember the old Panorama did a program 10 years ago, one of those where they got hidden cameras and things, and it was a shocker. And that happened just before I became a minister. So I had a look at it. I thought, well, what about this outfit? They could come in. The pressure not to, immense in the system. Question why, and I'll let you follow that if you're interested.
Yeah, what I was about to say, why?
They had applied previously, but had been told that they hadn't fulfilled the requirements of a normal procurement process or something. And funnily enough, companies that exist, private sector companies that exist in this space, know how to fulfil the requirements of the MOJ and everything else, and they got the contract. But I wanted the evidence that they were actually, this was value for money, and that they were actually turning these kids' lives around. Because when I went to Diagrama in Spain, it was even the culture. I remember visiting a youth facility in this country, I won't say where, scared the living daylights out of me. And they had problems after I left with staff being beaten up. I went over into Spain, less security on site. These are with the young people and teenagers who'd murdered, raped. I'm not talking about petty stuff. And they had a completely different culture. And funnily enough, they had a completely different set of outcomes.
Wow.
I just say that as an example. This space, there are some good organisations, some good people who want to try to effect change with the express intention of reducing crime, and yet they struggle to get through into the justice sort of system and be taken seriously. And if there's one thing I regret, because I was the first minister to resign over the whole Brexit wars nonsense and the end of the last decade. The one thing I regret was I was sacrificing being a justice minister. So having thought I was being given an absolute shocker of a job, by the end of 2 years, I wanted to continue doing it because I could see where you could make progress.
Yeah. And that's a fairly poignant point to finish on, and one I hope we can pursue and speak about again, Philip. It's been great to have you on, sir. Thank you. Dr. Phillip Lee, former Justice Minister. I thought that last point is great. I didn't really want the job as Justice Minister. When I got it, I didn't want it to end because you felt, wow, I can do something that can make a difference. I think what he was saying in another translation, we didn't get time to really pursue it, was that you've got civil servants and bureaucracy in every strand and tentacle of government. I'd imagine this is no different. And the last thing civil servants ever really want is change. You'll start changing stuff, meddling. No, we've got this system in place, but it doesn't work very well. No, but it's more hassle and jip if we try and change it. I think that's the mentality they're dealing with. Fair play to Phillip Lee, former Justice Minister with the Tories. Thank you to him. Over to you.